The restaurant was filled with the soft sound of music and the clinking of glasses. The lights were warm and golden, reflecting off the polished tables and silverware. In one corner, a young waitress hurried from one table to another, balancing trays with practiced care. Her name was Lily. She moved quietly, always with a gentle smile, though her eyes sometimes looked tired. Every evening, she worked long hours at this luxury hotel restaurant. The guests who came here were usually wealthy, business owners, celebrities, or people who dressed as if they owned the world. To them, waiters were invisible. They talked over her, snapped fingers for attention, and sometimes treated her like she was nothing more than part of the furniture. Still, Lily never let it show. She needed the job and she needed the money. Outside of work, life was simple and hard. She lived in a small apartment with her mother and younger brother. Her mother had health problems and couldn't work much, and her brother was still studying. Every paycheck Lily earned went toward rent, medicines, and groceries. There wasn't much left for herself. But she didn't complain. She believed that one day things might get better. There was something most people didn't know about her. Before she became a waitress, Lily had dreamed of being a musician. She used to play the piano for hours every day. Her teacher once said she had a gift, something rare and full of emotion. She loved the feeling of her fingers gliding over the keys, turning silence into something beautiful, but that dream had faded when her father passed away suddenly. Bills piled up, and she had to leave her music school to help her family. She never touched a piano again, at least not in public. Even so, when she passed by the hotel lobby where a grand piano stood, she often paused for a second. Late at night, when the guests had gone and the restaurant was quiet, she would sometimes press a single key, softly, just to hear it sound. It reminded her of who she used to be. That evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A grand charity dinner was being hosted for some of the city's richest people. The event was elegant, full of perfume, expensive suits, and shining jewelry. Every waiter had been told to be extra careful. The manager was strict and nervous, walking around to make sure everything looked perfect. Lily was assigned to one of the main tables, reserved for a group of very wealthy guests. She adjusted her apron, took a deep breath, and told herself to stay calm. As she approached the table, she could hear them laughing loudly. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed as if they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. One of the men was a well-known investor. People whispered about his success and how powerful he was. "Good evening," Lily said politely as she placed their menus on the table. Her voice was soft but clear. One of the women didn't even look at her. Another raised an eyebrow, barely hiding her boredom. The investor just gave a short nod and continued his conversation. Lily smiled politely and stepped back, waiting for their orders. She was used to it, the lack of respect, the impatience. But tonight she hoped things would go smoothly. When she returned with a tray of drinks, one of the men cracked a joke that made everyone laugh loudly. Startled by the sudden noise, Lily's hand shook slightly and a few drops of water spilled onto the investor's sleeve. It wasn't much, just a small splash, but he frowned instantly. "Careful," he snapped, glaring at her. "Do you even know how to hold a tray?" The others laughed. One of the women chuckled and said, "Maybe she's new. Or maybe this is her big night at fine dining." Lily felt her face heat up. She quickly apologized and offered a napkin, but the man waved her off. "Just bring another one. And try not to drop it this time," he said sharply. She nodded, swallowed her embarrassment, and walked away quietly. Inside, she felt small, like her hard work meant nothing. But she reminded herself, it's just a job, just a bad moment. Keep going. As the evening went on, the restaurant filled with the sound of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. A soft tune played from the speakers, but everyone was waiting for the live performance that was supposed to happen later. The hotel had arranged for a well-known pianist to play during dinner, but time kept passing and the performer hadn't arrived. The host of the event, an older gentleman with a cheerful face, went up to the microphone and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "our pianist seems to be running late due to some traffic, but we'll still try to keep you entertained. Does anyone here know how to play?" A few people laughed. The investor from Lily's table leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Maybe our waitress can give it a try," he said loudly enough for others to hear. Laughter spread around the room. Lily froze in place. Her heart pounded in her chest. She pretended to focus on clearing a table, pretending she didn't hear. But inside her stomach tightened. She wanted to disappear. Her manager, who had overheard the joke, looked toward her with sympathy. He knew about her past. He had seen her touch the piano keys once late at night when the restaurant was empty. He gave her a small nod as if to say, "Don't let them get to you." But Lily couldn't move. She just kept her eyes down, pretending to wipe the table. The laughter slowly died down, and the host continued with his announcements. Still, she felt their eyes on her, mocking her silently. When she finally stepped into the back room for a short break, she sat on a chair and stared at her hands. They were shaking slightly. She hated that she let their words hurt her, but deep down it wasn't just about them. It was about the dream she had buried long ago, the part of her that used to believe she could be something more. She closed her eyes for a moment and imagined herself sitting at a piano again. She could almost feel the smooth keys under her fingers, the sound of music filling the air. For a moment it felt real. "Lily," her manager called softly from the door. "Are you okay?" She looked up and nodded quickly. "Yes, I'm fine." He hesitated before saying, "You know, you shouldn't let people like that make you feel small. You have something they don't." She gave a faint smile, though she didn't say anything. He didn't press further. When she returned to the dining hall, the atmosphere was even livelier. The guests were laughing, toasting, and eating. The grand piano in the corner still stood empty, waiting. Lily passed by it on her way to the kitchen. For a second, she stopped and looked at it, the glossy black surface, the keys gleaming under the light. No one noticed her pause. To them, she was just a waitress carrying dishes. But inside, she was fighting a quiet battle, between fear and the faint whisper of courage. As she went back to work, one of the younger staff whispered to her, "You okay?" They were being really mean. Lily just nodded. "I'm fine," she said softly. "They're just guests. It's just one night." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. It wasn't just one night. It was every night she felt unseen. Every time she hid her real self behind an apron and a polite smile. Every time she let her dreams stay silent while others laughed. The evening dragged on and her shift felt endless. Yet she kept serving with the same calm patience, making sure every plate was perfect, every glass full. Some of the guests smiled at her kindly. Others didn't even look. But she treated them all the same, with quiet dignity. When the event finally ended and the guests began to leave, Lily helped clear the tables. The investor and his group stood near the piano, still talking loudly. As they passed her, one of them gave a small nod as if to say goodbye, but none apologized. She didn't expect them to. When everyone was gone and the restaurant turned quiet again, Lily walked over to the piano. She looked around. Only a few staff members were left. The lights were dim. She reached out and pressed one key softly. The note echoed, gentle and pure. She smiled to herself. Tomorrow the same people would come again, the same laughter, the same noise. But maybe, just maybe, things wouldn't always stay this way. Somewhere deep inside her, a spark was still alive. She didn't know it yet, but life was about to give her a chance to show the world who she really was. And when that moment came, no one would ever laugh at her again. The next morning, the sky outside was gray and a light drizzle tapped against Lily's window. She sat at the small kitchen table sipping tea before work. Her mother was resting in the next room, and her younger brother was getting ready for school. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of running water and the hum of an old refrigerator. Lily's mind kept going back to the night before. The laughter, the jokes, the way they had looked at her as if she didn't belong there. She tried to brush it off, but it stayed with her, like a faint bruise that refused to fade. When her brother walked into the kitchen, he noticed her silence. "Rough night?" he asked softly. Lily smiled a little. "Just a long one. Nothing new." He poured some cereal and sat across from her. "You work too hard," he said. "You should take a break once in a while." "I'll rest when things are better," she replied with a small laugh. "For now, we need to keep going." He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Before leaving for school, he hugged her from behind and said, "You're the best sister in the world." Those simple words warmed her heart more than the tea in her hands. By the time she reached the hotel, the restaurant was already buzzing. Staff were setting up for another busy day. Her manager gave her a quick nod as she clocked in. "We've got another event tonight," he said. "A private dinner for the same group from last night." Lily's stomach tightened. "The same group?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he replied. Apparently they liked the food and service, so they booked again. She forced a small smile. Of course, she said, though inside she felt nervous. She didn't want to see those faces again, those eyes that had laughed at her. But she reminded herself, this was her job. She couldn't choose her guests. All she could do was be professional and keep her head high. Throughout the day she worked as usual, setting tables, polishing glasses, making sure every detail was perfect. She was careful with everything she did. But every now and then, she caught herself glancing at the piano in the corner of the dining hall. It sat there quietly, like a secret waiting to be told. As evening came, the guests started arriving. The same voices filled the room, loud, confident, and full of laughter. Lily kept her expression calm as she approached their table. "Well, look who's back," one of the men said with a smirk when he saw her. "Hope you've been practicing your serving skills." The others laughed softly, but she only smiled politely and replied, "Good evening, sir. Would you like to start with drinks?" Her calmness seemed to annoy them. It was as if they wanted her to react, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She focused on her work, staying graceful and steady. Still inside, she could feel the same sting as before. Every careless word from their table felt like a small cut. As she served their food, one of the women at the table looked around the restaurant and said, "It's a shame there's no live music tonight. It feels dull without it." The investor replied, "Maybe our waitress can help again," smirking as he looked at Lily. This time, the others laughed louder, and even a few nearby guests turned their heads. Lily felt the heat rise to her face, but she stayed composed. Her manager, who had been watching from the side, stepped forward quickly. "Sir, our performer had an emergency today, but we'll arrange music for your next visit," he said politely. The investor waved his hand dismissively. "No need, I was only joking." Lily quietly turned away and walked back to the service station. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured water into glasses. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of being treated as if her worth depended on her uniform. Later that evening, when most of the guests had finished eating, the host once again went up to the microphone. He smiled warmly and said, "I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Though our scheduled pianist couldn't make it again, I hope you've all enjoyed the evening." One of the guests called out jokingly, "We can still have music. Let the waitress play." Laughter filled the hall. Lily froze where she stood. She looked down, wishing she could disappear. But before she could move, her manager walked over to her quietly. His expression was calm but serious. "You don't have to," he said softly. "But if you want to, this could be your chance." She blinked in surprise. "My chance?" he nodded. "You've got nothing to prove to them, but maybe you should remind yourself of who you are." Lily looked at the piano. It seemed to call to her, glowing softly under the lights. Her heart pounded in her chest. For years, she had hidden that part of herself, buried it deep under fear and exhaustion. She took a breath and nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. Her manager gave her a small smile and stepped aside. The room was still buzzing with laughter when Lily walked toward the piano. The sound of her footsteps echoed slightly against the floor. Some people turned to look, confused. The guests at the main table fell silent, their laughter fading. When she sat down on the piano bench, a hush spread through the hall. "Wait, she's serious?" someone whispered. The investor chuckled under his breath, clearly expecting a joke. But Lily didn't look at him. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, her back straight, eyes focused. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she pressed the first note. It was soft, delicate, but pure. Then another. Then a third. Slowly the melody began to build, smooth and graceful, each note flowing into the next. The laughter stopped. The room became silent. Her hands moved faster, finding their rhythm. Her eyes closed slightly as she played, lost in the music. Every sound that came from the piano carried a piece of her story, her struggles, her pain, her hopes. The melody rose and fell like a tide. It filled the air, wrapping around every listener like a warm wind. The guests who had mocked her now sat still, their faces blank with disbelief. The investor leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. Even the waiters stopped in their tracks, their trays forgotten in their hands. Lily played as if the piano were speaking for her, saying everything she had never dared to say aloud. Her body moved with the rhythm, graceful and calm. When she reached the final part, the notes slowed, softer now, almost like a whisper. Then with one last touch she ended. The last note hung in the air for a long second before fading into silence. No one moved. Then someone started clapping. Another joined in. Within seconds the whole room erupted into applause. Some people even stood up. Lily looked up, startled. Her eyes shimmered under the lights, and for the first time in a long while she smiled. A real, unguarded smile. Her manager was clapping proudly from the back of the room. The host walked up to her, clearly amazed. "That was incredible," he said softly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lily hesitated. "A long time ago," she replied gently. Before life got in the way. The investors' group was silent. They looked uncomfortable now, their earlier arrogance gone. The woman who had laughed the loudest looked down at her hands, ashamed. When Lily stood up and walked away from the piano, the applause followed her. It was the kind of sound that seemed to echo deep inside her chest, washing away years of quiet hurt. She went to the back of the restaurant where her manager was waiting. He smiled at her proudly. "You did it," he said. "You reminded them what grace really looks like." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. "I didn't do it for them," she whispered. "I did it for me," he nodded. "Even better." That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets, the world felt different. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and she could still hear the echo of the piano in her mind. For the first time in years, she felt light. She had no idea what would come next, whether that moment would change anything or not. But she didn't care. What mattered was that she had found her courage again, somewhere behind her. In that golden-lit restaurant, the people who once laughed at her now sat in silence, realizing they had misjudged someone who carried more beauty in her heart than all their money could buy. And for Lily, that was enough. When Lily woke up the next morning, sunlight streamed softly through her thin curtains. For the first time in a long while, she didn't wake up dreading the day ahead. Her body was tired, but her heart felt strangely light. The memory of the night before replayed in her mind. The piano, the silence that had filled the room, and the sound of applause that had followed. She still couldn't believe it had happened. She had actually played again after all those years. And people had listened. They had felt something. As she got ready for work, she half expected the feeling to fade, but it stayed with her, like a quiet spark inside her chest. She tied her hair back, put on her uniform, and smiled at her reflection in the mirror. It was the same face she saw every day, but this time, she saw something different in her eyes, something like hope. When she arrived at the hotel, the restaurant staff were already busy preparing for the day, but the moment they saw her, a few of them broke into smiles. "There she is, the star of last night," one of the waiters said, clapping his hands. Lily laughed softly, her cheeks turning pink. "Oh, stop it," she said. "I mean it," another coworker said. "Everyone's been talking about you. Even the hotel manager mentioned your performance this morning." Lily blinked in surprise. "He did?" "Yeah," the waiter said. "He said it was one of the best moments this restaurant has ever had. You really impressed everyone." She felt her heart flutter. It was hard to believe that something as simple as playing the piano could cause such a ripple. Later that afternoon, when she was setting up tables, her manager walked up to her. "Can we talk for a second?" he asked kindly. She nodded and followed him to a quiet corner near the staff area. "You did something remarkable last night," he said with a gentle smile. "The hotel's owner heard about it and wanted to know who you were. They're thinking about hosting more live performances here, and they want you to be part of it." Lily froze. "Me, but I'm just a waitress." "Not anymore," he said. "You're more than that. You showed them something real, something money can't buy." She didn't know what to say. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her tray. "I don't even know if I could do it again," she whispered. "You can," he said, "because it's already in you. You just forgot for a while." Lily smiled faintly. She wanted to believe him. That evening, when her shift ended, she stayed behind for a little while. The restaurant was empty now, chairs stacked neatly, lights dimmed. The grand piano sat quietly in the corner. She walked toward it, sat down, and gently placed her fingers on the keys. This time she didn't feel nervous. She began to play a slow, simple melody, something her teacher had taught her years ago. The notes were soft, filling the quiet space around her. She closed her eyes, lost in the sound. When she finished, she turned around and noticed someone standing at the entrance. It was one of the guests from the charity dinner, the older man who had been hosting the event. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said kindly. "I just came to thank you in person. That was an unforgettable performance last night." Lily stood up quickly, a little embarrassed. "Thank you, sir. I didn't know you were still here," he smiled. "I wanted to find you. You have real talent, and I think it shouldn't go unnoticed." She didn't know what to say. "I appreciate that," she replied softly. He nodded. "I know someone who works with young musicians, people who have potential but never got the chance to finish their training. If you're interested, I can connect you with them." Lily's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Of course," he said warmly. "People like you remind us what art really means. It's not about fame or wealth, it's about feeling. And you made everyone in that room feel something." She could hardly speak. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. He handed her a small card with a name and number written on it. "Think about it," he said. "You deserve a chance to follow your dream again." After he left, Lily sat back down, staring at the card. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. She hadn't thought about chasing her dream again. Not really. Life had felt too heavy, too complicated. But now, for the first time in years, a door was opening. The next few days passed quickly. Guests who had witnessed her performance started asking about her. Some even requested to meet the girl who played the piano. The hotel buzzed with quiet talk about her talent. Even the same group of wealthy guests returned, though this time they didn't laugh when they saw her. When Lily approached their table, they smiled politely. The investor spoke first. "About the other night," he said awkwardly. "We may have underestimated you." "That was quite something." Lily gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you," she said softly. She didn't hold any anger in her heart. The music had washed that away. That evening, when her shift ended, she found herself sitting by the piano again. The card from the kind man was still in her pocket. After a moment's hesitation, she took out her phone and dialed the number. A woman's voice answered, warm and professional. "Hello, this is the Community Arts Program. How can I help you?" Lily explained who she was and what had happened at the restaurant. The woman listened patiently, then said, "That sounds wonderful. We'd love to meet you. Can you come by next week for an informal audition?" Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, I can," she said quickly. When she hung up, she sat there quietly for a long time, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this was a chance she couldn't ignore. The following days were filled with nervous energy. She practiced whenever she could, early in the morning before work, late at night after her shift. Her fingers were stiff at first, but soon the old rhythm returned. She could almost hear her teacher's voice guiding her through every note. Her mother noticed the change in her. "You seem happier these days," she said one evening while watching Lily wash dishes. "I am," Lily said, smiling. Something good might be happening. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "You deserve that, my dear. You've given so much of yourself. It's time life gave something back." When the day of the audition came, Lily felt nervous but ready. She wore a simple dress and arrived early at the small music center. The woman from the phone greeted her warmly and led her to a piano room. "You can play anything you feel comfortable with," the woman said. Lily sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The room filled with soft flowing notes that carried every piece of her story. The struggle, the pain, the courage. When she finished, the woman's eyes were misty. "That was beautiful," she said quietly. "You have something special, something that can't be taught. We'd be honored to have you join our program." Lily's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," the woman said, smiling. "And there's more. The man who recommended you offered to sponsor your classes. He won't have to worry about the fees." Tears filled Lily's eyes as she whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." "Just keep playing," the woman replied gently. "That's thanks enough." When Lily left the building, the world outside seemed brighter. The sun was shining and she could feel the warmth on her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel stuck. She felt free. That night, she walked home through the city streets with a light heart. The noise of traffic and people felt like music. She thought about all the times she had wanted to give up, all the nights she had cried quietly so no one would hear. And now, here she was, standing on the edge of a new beginning. When she reached her apartment, her brother greeted her at the door. "So how did it go?" he asked eagerly. She smiled and hugged him tightly. "It went better than I could have imagined," she said softly. He grinned. I told you things would get better, she laughed, brushing his hair back from his face. You were right. That night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her heart full of gratitude. Life had taken her down a long, difficult path, but somehow it had led her back to where she belonged. She didn't know what the next chapter would bring, but she was ready to face it with courage, humility, and the quiet power of someone who had learned what it meant to rise after being looked down upon. And though she didn't realize it yet, her story was only just beginning. The next few weeks brought quiet but meaningful changes to Lily's life. She still worked her shifts at the restaurant, still wore the same uniform, still smiled at the guests as she always did. But something about her felt different now. The heaviness that once followed her everywhere had lifted. There was light in her steps, calm in her face, and something new in her eyes. Purpose. Every few days after finishing work, she took a bus across town to the small music center. There she practiced for hours, learning new pieces and polishing old ones. The first time she walked into that building, she had felt like she didn't belong. Everyone around her seemed confident and trained, while she had only her old memories and rusty fingers. But slowly, note by note, she found her rhythm again. Her teacher at the center, a kind woman with silver hair and gentle eyes, noticed something rare in her. "You play with heart," she said once. "Many people can play beautifully, but few can make others feel what they feel." Lily smiled shyly. "I just play what's inside me," she said softly. The teacher nodded. "And that's exactly why people listen." Back at the restaurant, word of her story continued to spread. Some guests came in just to see the young waitress who had once silenced a hall full of wealthy people with her piano playing. Others left generous tips, adding little notes that said things like, "Keep chasing your dream," or "You're an inspiration." Even her co-workers treated her differently now, not because she was special, but because she had become a symbol of quiet strength. They saw in her a reminder that every person had a story, even the ones who served tables and wore name tags. But not everyone found it easy to accept the change. The group of wealthy guests who had mocked her before returned one evening for another event. Lily noticed them as soon as they walked in. She felt a familiar tension rise in her chest, but this time she wasn't afraid. When she approached their table, they looked a little uncomfortable. The investor, the same man who had once smirked at her, cleared his throat and said, "Good evening. I hope you're doing well." "I am," Lily said politely. "Would you like your usual order?" He nodded, avoiding her eyes. "Yes, thank you." There was a pause. One of the women finally spoke. "We heard about the scholarship," she said. "That's wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you," Lily said, smiling gently. "It means a lot." The woman hesitated, then added, "You were amazing that night. We were wrong to make fun of you." Lily met her gaze and said quietly, "It's okay. Sometimes people don't see what's in front of them until they're forced to listen." The woman lowered her eyes, embarrassed. The investor looked away. No more jokes were made that evening. That night, as Lily walked home, she felt no bitterness. Instead, she felt peace. Forgiveness came easily to her because she understood something many people didn't. Sometimes, life's hardest moments were the ones that prepared you for something better. A few weeks later, her manager called her into the office with exciting news. "The hotel is planning another charity event next month," he said. "And they want you to be the performer this time." Lily blinked in surprise. "Me?" He nodded. "You'll be on the stage, not serving tables." The owner insisted on it. Her heart raced. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said, smiling. "You've earned it," she laughed softly. Then yes. When the night of the event arrived, the restaurant was transformed. The lights glowed warmly. The tables were dressed with white cloth and golden candles, and a small stage had been set up in the corner with the grand piano polished to a shine. Lily wore a simple, elegant dress that the hotel had provided for her. It wasn't fancy, but it made her feel graceful. Her co-workers cheered her on as she prepared backstage. "Don't be nervous," one of them said. "You're going to be amazing." She smiled, though her hands were trembling slightly. "I hope so," she whispered. As guests began to arrive, she recognized several faces from before, including the group that had once mocked her. But this time they looked at her differently. Their laughter was polite, their smiles softer. When the investor saw her walk toward the piano, he gave a respectful nod. The host of the event introduced her warmly. Tonight we have a special performance from someone who reminds us that talent can come from the most unexpected places, he said. Please welcome Lily. The audience applauded as she stepped onto the stage. The lights above her felt warm, and the quiet murmur of the crowd faded into stillness. She took a deep breath, sat down at the piano, and let her fingers rest on the keys. When she began to play, everything else disappeared. The music flowed out of her like a story she had been waiting her whole life to tell. Each note carried the sound of struggle, hope, and love, her love for her mother, her family, and the life she was rebuilding. The room was silent except for the sound of the piano. Guests who had been chatting moments ago were now completely still. Some closed their eyes. Others held their breath. By the time she played the final note, many people in the audience had tears in their eyes. The applause that followed was louder and longer than she had ever heard before. The host returned to the microphone, smiling. Now that, he said, was a performance none of us will forget. Lily stood and bowed politely. Her heart was racing, her eyes shining. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. After the event ended, guests came up to her one by one, offering congratulations. A few asked where they could hear her play again. Others told her she had inspired them. Even the investor and his group approached her. He looked at her for a moment before speaking. "You've shown us something important tonight," he said quietly. "I think we all learned a lesson from you." She smiled kindly. "I'm glad you did," she said. He nodded and stepped aside. There was no arrogance in his face anymore, only humility. Later that night, when the restaurant emptied out, Lily sat alone at the piano for a while. The lights were dim now, the applause a fading echo in her mind. She thought about how far she had come, from being mocked and ignored to being applauded and respected. Her manager joined her, placing a cup of tea on the piano. "You made us all proud tonight," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied. "I couldn't have done it without your support," he smiled. "You did it because you never gave up." "Remember that," she nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I will." When she went home that night, her mother was waiting awake. She had seen the event live through a recording the hotel had shared online. The moment Lily walked in, her mother stood up, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "You made it, my love. You finally made it." Lily held her mother close, unable to speak. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered back, "I just played, Mama. That's all I did." Her mother pulled back and smiled through her tears. "No, you didn't just play. You showed them who you are." That night, Lily sat by the window long after everyone had gone to bed. The city lights twinkled below like scattered stars. She thought about the man who had given her the chance, her manager who believed in her, and even those who had laughed at her, because, in some strange way, they had all played a part in pushing her forward. She realized that sometimes life humbles you before it lifts you up. Sometimes it takes being looked down upon to discover the strength to rise. And as she stared out into the quiet night, she knew deep inside that this was only the beginning. There were bigger stages waiting, new songs to play, and people she hadn't yet met who would need to hear her story, not just through her words, but through her music. She whispered softly to herself, one day at a time, and smiled. Months passed, and life slowly started to settle into a rhythm that felt new yet comforting. Lily still worked part-time at the hotel restaurant, but her evenings were now filled with piano lessons and small performances. The music center that had helped her grow invited her to play at local events, and every time she touched the keys, more people noticed her talent. At first, she was nervous. She was just a waitress turned student, and the thought of standing on stages made her palms sweat. But after every show, she saw how people reacted, how they smiled, how some closed their eyes, how others wiped tears away quietly, and that gave her courage. Her teacher often reminded her, music is not about perfection, it's about connection. Lily carried those words everywhere she went. She played not for fame or applause, but because it made her feel alive, like she was giving a part of herself that words could never explain. Her mother's health had also improved slightly. The medicine was expensive, but the extra money Lily earned from performing helped cover it. Her younger brother had started going to school regularly again, and whenever Lily practiced at home, he would sit on the floor beside her, listening quietly. Sometimes he'd say, "One day I'll learn too," and she would smile and tell him, Then we'll play together. One morning, Lily received a call that made her heart skip a beat. It was from the hotel manager. His voice was cheerful. "Lily, the owner wants to speak with you about something special," he said. A few days later, she sat in the manager's office, her hands folded nervously in her lap. The owner, a kind, elderly man with sharp eyes, smiled warmly at her. "I've seen the video of your performance," he said. "You were extraordinary. We're hosting another charity gala next month, and this time we'd like you to be our official performer. You won't be serving tables, you'll be the star of the evening." Lily's mouth fell slightly open. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "Me? Really?" she asked softly. "Yes, you," the man said, chuckling. "You've earned it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll do my best." The weeks that followed were a blur of practice and preparation. The hotel provided her with a new piano for rehearsals, and even helped arrange a small stylist to help her look elegant for the big night. Her co-workers were thrilled. Every time she came to work, someone would say, "Our star pianist is here." And she'd laugh shyly, still not used to the attention. One evening, after finishing her shift, she sat alone in the restaurant. The lights were dim, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. She placed her hands on the piano and began to play the same song that had changed her life months ago, the one she had played the night she was mocked. The melody filled the empty space like a warm memory. Her manager stood at the doorway, listening. When she finished, he said, "It's strange, isn't it? The same song, but everything feels different now." She looked up and smiled. "It's not the song that changed," she said softly. "It's me." The night of the gala arrived sooner than she expected. The entire hotel was decorated beautifully. Crystal lights, golden drapes, and fresh flowers everywhere. The air buzzed with laughter and chatter. Guests in elegant clothes filled the room, glasses of champagne in their hands. Lily stood backstage wearing a long cream-colored gown that shimmered under the lights. Her hair was neatly tied back, and a touch of soft makeup highlighted her calm face. She wasn't the nervous waitress she once was. She was calm, confident, and ready. As she peeked through the curtain, she recognized a few faces, including the same group of wealthy guests who had once laughed at her. But this time, their expressions were different. They looked curious, even proud. The investor caught her eye and gave a small nod, as if silently acknowledging how far she had come. The host walked onto the stage and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight, we are honored to have a very special performer. Someone whose story reminds us that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. Please welcome Lily." The applause that followed was warm and sincere. Lily took a deep breath and stepped out onto the stage. The lights felt bright against her skin, but she didn't mind. She sat at the piano, adjusted the stool, and for a moment, she just listened, to the quiet, to the breath of the audience, to her own heartbeat. Then she began to play. The first few notes were soft, delicate, like whispers of the past. Slowly, the music grew stronger, filled with emotion. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was her journey. Every key told a piece of her story. The long nights of work, the mocking laughter, the tears she hid in the kitchen, the gentle encouragement of her manager, her mother's love, her brother's smile. People listened in complete silence. The same hall that once echoed with laughter now felt sacred. The air was heavy with feeling. A few guests in the front row leaned forward, their eyes glistening. When the final note faded into silence, there was a heartbeat of stillness. And then, the room erupted in applause. Loud, powerful, and endless. People stood clapping, cheering, some even whistling. The investor who had once mocked her stood too, his hands red from clapping, his expression full of respect. Lily stood and bowed, her smile trembling with emotion. She looked out into the sea of faces, feeling warmth rush through her. For a moment she saw her old self, the tired waitress carrying trays, the girl who felt invisible. And then she saw who she was now. It was almost hard to believe they were the same person. After the performance, people surrounded her, congratulating her, shaking her hand. Several offered her new opportunities: a recording at a local studio, a small tour around nearby towns, a scholarship to continue studying music abroad. Lily was overwhelmed but deeply grateful.